So how did the gun fire?
I don't know how the gun fired. What I'm saying is that
Tim, listen.
No,
Listen.
please stop and let me talk.
It was a calm October evening in the small town of Vincent, Alabama, when a loud gunshot broke the silence. Inside the house behind the local church, Janet Tillman lay on the bed, lifeless. Her daughter stood in the doorway, frozen with shock, while their father, Tim Tillman, frantically called for help, saying it was all a terrible accident. But as investigators started digging, things didn't add up. The story wasn't as simple as it first seemed. What really happened that night? Was it just a tragic mistake, or was there something much darker going on? The answers would leave the town reeling and uncover secrets no one saw coming. Janet Tillman was born on January 18, 1965, in the United States to Charles and Dorothy Harper, a devout couple from Jacksonville, Florida. She grew up alongside her two sisters, Judy and Joan, and a brother named Charles. Her father, Charles Harper, a pastor devoted to his faith, instilled strong religious values in his children, which shaped Janet into a compassionate individual with a deep sense of service and commitment to others. In the early 1980s, Janet met Timothy Tillman, or Tim as he was known. By December 1983, the two were married. Tim, born in 1964, had grown up with his mother Magdalene and stepfather David, along with his two siblings. Although details about his biological father are scarce, it's believed his name was Dwight, as one of Tim's brothers was identified as Dwight Tillman Jr. in family records. Janet and Tim began their married life in Jacksonville, Florida, where they welcomed two daughters, Jessica in 1986 and Tiffany Nicole in 1991. Tim's career as a pastor took off in the early 1990s, and Janet played a key role as a supportive minister's wife, deeply involved in church activities and her husband's ministry. Outwardly, the couple seemed to embody the ideal marriage, but behind closed doors, their relationship faced challenges. Tim's struggles with personal morality led him to engage in strange behaviors for a pastor, including visiting strip clubs and consorting with sex workers. Despite knowing about these indiscretions, Janet chose to remain supportive, hoping Tim would overcome his struggles and honor his responsibilities as a pastor and father. However, Tim's actions eventually led to serious consequences. In 1995, after being seen leaving a disreputable nightclub, he was removed from his ministry in Jacksonville. The family relocated to Minnesota, where Tim found a position leading a new congregation. Yet, history repeated itself, and Tim was dismissed again after it was revealed he was having an affair with a member of the congregation. This time, the family chose to remain in Minnesota while Tim sought work outside the church. He found employment as a civilian worker in a prison, where he monitored the comings and goings of visitors, but this role was short-lived. By the early 2000s, the Tillman family moved to Vincent, Alabama, a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Vincent, with a population of just 2,000 at the time, offered a fresh start. In 2003, Tim was invited to serve as a guest pastor at the local church that was without a permanent minister. His charismatic sermons and knowledge of Scripture impressed the congregation, who saw him as an ideal leader. However, Tim delayed the required background check and official approval from the Alabama District Council of the Assemblies of God, never completing the process. Janet, meanwhile, became a well-loved member of the community. She actively participated in local events, including supporting the Vincent High School band through the parent-teacher organization. She was not just the pastor's wife, but a vital part of the community, admired for her kindness and leadership. In October 2005, Tim organized a charity event to support families in New Orleans affected by Hurricane Katrina, which had devastated the area 2 months earlier. The event, held on October 26th, included various activities, such as a turkey shooting competition where participants paid $1 to test their aim. This event symbolized Tim's attempt to rally his community around compassion and charity, reflecting the values he preached. However, it also marked a pivotal point in the story of the Tillman family. The charity event unfolded smoothly, drawing a steady flow of locals eager to contribute and enjoy some friendly competition. Many participants were excited to show off their marksmanship, while others braced for the inevitable teasing that would follow their less-than-stellar performance. As the day progressed, one of the rifles used in the shooting game jammed. Tim Tillman seized the moment to conclude the event, citing the upcoming church service as another reason to wrap up the activities. One of the attendees offered to take the malfunctioning rifle home to fix it, but Tim decided to handle it himself. He gathered the rifles and carried them back to the parsonage, a residence behind the church where he lived with his family. Janet helped by carrying one of the weapons, following her husband, who had the other two. Once inside, Tim planned to store the rifles under their bed, keeping them out of sight and out of reach of their daughters. The couple headed straight to their bedroom. Janet, walking ahead, stepped into the room first. As Tim followed, one of the rifles slipped from his grasp, struck the door frame and discharged. The bullet struck Janet in the back, just a short distance away, and she collapsed onto the bed. The loud gunshots startled their daughters, who rushed to the bedroom door, only to witness their mother lying motionless with a severe wound. Tim shouted at them to call for help, and they immediately dialed emergency services. Tragically, the injury was fatal. By the time first responders arrived, there was nothing they could do. At just 40 years old, Janet was pronounced dead at the scene. Witnesses recalled Tim wailing in anguish, overwhelmed by grief, while his daughters cried uncontrollably. Emergency personnel escorted the girls out of the home to the care of a neighbor. However, some accounts of the event describe Tim's behavior differently. According to one source, he appeared calm and composed, providing a detailed explanation of the incident almost immediately. Regardless of initial impressions, the police asked Tim to accompany them to the station for a formal statement. After all, someone had lost their life, and the circumstances needed to be officially documented. At the station, Tim appeared nervous and visibly shaken as he recounted the events. He explained how the day had gone, from ending the turkey shoot fundraiser due to a malfunctioning rifle to the moment the weapon accidentally discharged at home. Tim demonstrated how he had been holding the rifle when it slipped and discharged. Despite his emotional state, he repeatedly requested to return home, expressing concern for his daughters, who were in the care of a community member. The officers, understanding his distress, decided they had enough information for the time being. They allowed him to leave, noting that firearm accidents, while tragic, were not uncommon. In the days following the incident, Tim faced the difficult task of informing Janet's family. Her relatives, devastated by the news, traveled to Vincent for the funeral and to hear the details of the tragedy. According to one of Jeanette's sisters, although the family did not expect such a horrific event, they had harbored some mistrust toward Tim. She recalled how he avoided eye contact during their meeting and never apologized for what he described as an accidental shooting. On November 1st, a memorial service for Janet was held at the local church, where she was remembered as a devoted wife, mother, and community member. Afterward, her remains were taken to Jacksonville, Florida, for burial in the Gardens of Memory Cemetery. Back in Vincent, law enforcement conducted routine checks on Tim's background, as he was the only person present during Janet's death. What seemed like standard procedure took an unexpected turn when officers discovered that Tim held two driver's licenses under different names. One listed him as Timothy Tillman, the name by which he was widely known. The other bore the name Timothy Patrick McNally, yet both featured the same photograph. This discovery marked the beginning of a series of revelations that no one could have anticipated. The discovery of a second driver's license in Tim Tillman's name raised serious concerns among law enforcement. Issued just 4 months prior, it had been switched back to his real name, Timothy Tillman, only 2 weeks before Janet's death. This revelation, combined with Janet's family's mistrust of Tim, prompted one of her sisters to write to the district attorney, requesting a deeper investigation beyond what the small Vincent Police Department could handle. With this request and the unsettling evidence of false identities, Scott Bartell, a seasoned detective from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, was assigned to the case. Upon arriving in Vincent, Detective Bartell reviewed Tim's initial interview with local officers. To Bartell, Tim's demeanor appeared exaggerated and insincere, and he noted the preacher's frequent glances at the clock, a detail that seemed odd for someone grieving a sudden loss. Bartell began delving into Tim's past, uncovering a trail of moral failings. It became evident that Tim's history was riddled with infidelity, including frequenting strip clubs and hiring sex workers. According to Joan, Janet's sister, Janet knew about some of these indiscretions, which caused considerable tension in their marriage. Tim often smoothed things over with eloquent promises, which he routinely broke. The detective learned that Tim's habits had also affected his career. About 8 years earlier, he had been dismissed from his ministry in Florida after being seen leaving an adult club. His next pastoral role in Minnesota ended when he had an affair with a member of the congregation. Following his dismissal, Tim briefly worked at a prison, but even there, his behavior led to trouble. Investigators discovered that Tim once offered a ride home to a sex worker leaving the prison. Instead of taking her home, he drove her to an isolated location and coerced her into a sexual act. After being released, the woman reported the incident, and Tim was sentenced to 6 months in prison. This incident marked a breaking point for Janet. Heartbroken and weary, she moved to southern Alabama with her daughters to be closer to her sister Joan. Janet began working to support her family, and for a time, life seemed to stabilize. However, Tim's early release from prison shattered that peace. He reached out to Janet, begging for forgiveness and promising to change. Despite her family's warnings, Janet, a woman deeply rooted in her faith, decided to give her husband another chance. Tim returned home to a warm welcome from his daughters, unaware of the marital turmoil. Once again, Tim pledged to mend his ways and devote himself to his family and God. His charm and persuasive words quickly earned him a spot in the local church, where his passionate sermons captivated both the congregation and the pastor. Before long, Tim was invited to preach as a guest pastor at other churches. By January 2003, when a local church needed a full-time minister, Tim's reputation as an inspiring speaker led to his appointment at the Vincent local church. Although the church had requested Tim's criminal background check, he repeatedly delayed the process until it was ultimately forgotten, a strategy that now seemed calculated. Had the church known of his past, including his prison sentence and its cause, Tim would never have been offered the role of pastor. Despite these shocking revelations, investigators struggled to find a motive for Janet's death. She had endured and forgiven Tim's betrayals, making it difficult to comprehend why he would harm her. Yet, only a few weeks after her passing, Tim raised eyebrows by asking neighbors and church members to care for his daughters while he attended a pastor's retreat in Washington. This request, paired with the mounting inconsistencies in his story, left the community and detectives questioning what Tim might be hiding. It seemed unusual for a man who had recently lost his wife to leave his children and embark on a lengthy trip, especially since similar retreats were typically held closer to home. However, given his respected position as the church pastor, the neighbors agreed to help without question. What Tim didn't know was that police were already investigating him, trying to uncover the real reason behind his trip to the nation's capital. While detectives worked behind the scenes, Tim returned home. One night, believing his daughters were asleep, he was caught by his eldest in the middle of a video call with a woman she didn't recognize. Nearly 20 years old, Jessica immediately noticed her father's nervous attempt to hide the computer screen. The discovery led to a heated confrontation between father and daughter. Jessica later confided in the same neighbors who had looked after her and her sister during Tim's trip. Concerned, the couple confronted Tim, who admitted he was in contact with a woman named Molly, someone he claimed to have feelings for. The neighbors expressed their disapproval, pointing out how inappropriate it was for Tim to be romantically involved so soon after Janet's passing. But the situation escalated when one of his daughters shared her discovery with her Aunt Joan. To her, this revelation connected several suspicious dots, prompting her to contact the lead investigator on the case. With Tim's phone records in hand, detectives discovered a significant number of calls to a Washington-based number registered to Molly. The records confirmed that Tim had been in contact with her on the night of the retreat, with their last call occurring at 11 p.m. As the investigation progressed into 2006, Tim abruptly informed church leaders that he would step down as pastor and move to Florida with his daughters. He claimed this was to allow them to be closer to Janet's family. This decision raised further suspicions among investigators, who were still struggling to pinpoint a motive for Janet's death. However, the pieces were about to fall into place. A breakthrough came when Joan received a call regarding a $5,000 loan taken out in Janet's name. The loan, processed in January 2006, more than 2 months after her death, featured a forged endorsement of her signature. Digging deeper into the Tillman's financial records, investigators uncovered a troubling pattern. Tim had been using family funds for trips and accommodations with Molly, leaving the family in financial distress. This financial strain had been a source of conflict between Tim and Janet before her death. The forged loan and Tim's suspicious use of false identities, including his altered driver's license, provided enough grounds for detectives to interrogate him formally. Adding to this, the forensic report on Janet's death revealed inconsistencies in Tim's account of the shooting. The bullet's trajectory and the position of the gun at the time of the fatal shot didn't align with his original story of an accidental discharge. In November 2006, Detective Scott Bartell traveled to Florida to confront Tim. During the interrogation, Tim offered a series of explanations for his suspicious actions. He claimed the loan was necessary to cover funeral costs and household expenses after Janet's death, as her income was no longer available. Regarding his altered driver's license, Tim concocted a bizarre story, alleging he had changed his name out of anger upon learning that one of his brothers had an affair with Janet. However, he claimed to have reconciled with Janet before her death, prompting him to revert to his original name. As the detective pressed Tim on the inconsistencies surrounding the shooting, Tim initially remained composed but became increasingly agitated when his story was dissected. Meanwhile, the police visited Molly to gather information about her relationship with Tim. Molly revealed that she had known Tim for nearly a decade, having met him in Mississippi at her parents' home. She believed Tim was a widowed Navy officer. According to her, Tim claimed Janet had been handling fishing rods in the attic when she accidentally dislodged some rifles, causing one to discharge fatally. Molly even provided photos of Tim in a naval uniform. Molly revealed to investigators that she and Tim had been engaged, and when asked for the date of their engagement, authorities determined it was 2 months before Janet's death. Shocked and betrayed, Molly provided police with all the emails, letters, and messages she had saved from Tim. Through these, investigators uncovered more of Tim's fabricated persona. The Navy uniform he wore in photos, which Molly believed to be authentic, had been purchased at a second-hand store. Tim had used this false identity, posing as a high-ranking widowed Navy officer to justify his long absences, claiming he was on military missions. The information gathered from Molly became a pivotal part of Tim's next interrogation. Presented with these findings, Tim was arrested for document forgery. At that point, the only charge for which there was irrefutable evidence. While in custody, his communications were closely monitored. Tim continued to contact Molly, weaving an elaborate story about how his arrest was part of a covert government mission and that they would reunite once the mission was complete. Molly, still caught in his web of lies, believed him. After 6 months in jail for the forgery charge, Tim somehow posted bail and was released. Wasting no time, he married Molly, and the couple moved to Florida. However, the combined efforts of law enforcement and prosecutors eventually paid off. A grand jury decided there was enough evidence to indict Tim for the murder of his wife. Authorities quickly traveled to Florida, arresting Tim without resistance at his workplace. By October 2009, at 43 years old, Tim was back in Alabama, facing charges for Janet's murder and possession of a forged financial instrument, the $5,000 check. His bail was set at $500,000 as he awaited trial. The trial began later that month, with the prosecution relying heavily on circumstantial evidence. Forensic experts testified that the trajectory of the bullet that killed Janet was inconsistent with Tim's claim of an accidental discharge. Instead, the evidence suggested that the rifle had been deliberately aimed at her. Blood spatter analysis further supported this conclusion. A local witness added another critical piece to the puzzle, testifying that they had inspected the rifles before Tim left the fundraiser and confirmed they were unloaded. This indicated that Tim had intentionally loaded the gun that later killed his wife. The prosecution also presented evidence of Tim's financial struggles, exacerbated by his affair with Molly and his apparent motive to cash in on Janet's life insurance policy. Despite the defense's insistence that Janet's death was a tragic accident, the jury was unconvinced. Tim was found guilty of both charges, the murder of his wife and possession of a forged financial instrument. He was sentenced to life in prison for Janet's murder, with an additional 10 years for the forgery charge. However, the story didn't end there. In 2011, Tim's legal team appealed the verdict, arguing that combining the forgery charge with the murder case unfairly prejudiced the jury. The Alabama Court of Appeals agreed and ordered a retrial. In 2012, Tim was retried, once again found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Further appeals were denied, with the Alabama Supreme Court upholding the conviction in 2017. As of November 2024, Tim Tillman, now 60 years old, remains incarcerated. To his congregation, Tim appeared as a man of faith, a leader who embodied moral and spiritual principles. In reality, his actions betrayed everything he claimed to stand for, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Janet's daughters lost both their parents while her family and community continued to mourn the loss of a kind woman. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.